Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. President Donald Trump is delaying strikes on Iranian power plants for 5 days, highlighting, quote, productive conversations that could bring a fragile end to the Middle East conflict. Now, Iran, however, remains defiant, insisting no negotiations are taking place and accusing the U.S. of using the pause to influence energy prices. Now, meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated Sunday that 22 nations, including key European allies, are coordinating to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for Europe's energy security. Now, to analyze what all this means, we turn to Heinz Gärtner, professor of political science at the University of Vienna. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
So with this latest, first, if we look at the sequence, President Trump has said there's an ultimatum, 48 hours. He changes his mind. He says now there's progress. The Iranians said, no, that's not true. Tell us, if anything, if there's a strategy behind this, what's the impact? Where are we headed with all this?
First, it is important there is a pause of breeze. It's not a ceasefire which President Trump announced, so it's not. It's only a suspension of strikes against Iranian infrastructure, energy infrastructure. Nevertheless, it might well be that President Trump is looking for a ramp-off to somehow get out of this war, because there is domestic opposition, and also, of course, the international energy markets and the oil prices went up. But also the Europeans are feeling this. Right after the Israeli-American attack on Iran on February 28, the Europeans more or less kept quiet and condemned Iran then for attacking the neighboring countries, but now they feel the consequences of the war because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and they're considering what they want to do. And the nations, what you mentioned, they're coordinating, but there is no commitment here yet. And I do think the Europeans do not have very good neither diplomatic nor military means to intervene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment, about the Europeans. Also, Chancellor Merz of Germany, at first not so critical of the Americans, then sort of changed his mind. Apparently there's a phone call that he had recently with Donald Trump. He said in a press conference that he's happy that this postponement has occurred, that there won't be any bombings in the next few days. Let's see. How influential is the Chancellor, how influential are the Europeans, if at all, to Trump's policy in the Middle East?
I don't think they're very influential. President Trump wants them somehow to step in for legitimacy and also for military means, but the Europeans do not have the possibility and the means to open the Strait of Hormuz by force. So they didn't really do much, except that the UK is allowing the US using its bases and launchers, and France sent the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle to the Eastern Mediterranean, but not to the Gulf yet. But also, of course, the Europeans are afraid that there will be dragged in a wider war if they really commit them militarily. We should not forget the Americans. At the same time, when President Trump announced this suspension of the strikes, they are sending Marines, up to 8,000 Marines to the Gulf. We don't really know what to do, but there is a possibility, if the Europeans are also involved, of a mission creep. So once you get in, it's difficult to get out. We have this expression, we know this expression from the Vietnam War. And so some Europeans are still saying, oh, that's not our war. So rightly so, they're hesitant to get in directly involved. And also, there was a debate within NATO and also the European Union to invoke the the security commitments, Article 5 of NATO and Article 42.7 of the European Union, because there was a drone flying to the British base in Cyprus, but correctly so, the Europeans really did not invoke it, because that means that all NATO or EU members would be committed to contribute to this war.
Mm-hmm. I want to go a bit further because you said the Europeans are reluctant. Now we have the statement from the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who said, I believe it was on Sunday, that 22 countries, including NATO members and all other countries, South Korea, he mentioned Japan, according to reopen the Strait of Hormuz through coordination. So, I mean, we don't have exact details here, but first of all, how realistic is that statement from the Secretary General if the Europeans are still reluctant? And how, let's say, quickly could some sort of force like this really be put to sea?
No, I don't think that's really a serious claim. Secretary General Rutte wants to please President Trump and show him that the Europeans do something anyway. But there's still the talk about coordination and not commitment. And so neither NATO nor the European Union do, or even not individual member states, are committed themselves to open the Strait of Hormuz by force. But if the US cannot do this, the Europeans cannot do it at all. So only the end of the war would make it possible to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to calm down the energy markets and the oil price.
Mm-hmm. Also, an interesting note here, we have this from President Zelensky, and apparently he has said for one of his nightly addresses that Ukraine's military intelligence has irrefutable evidence that the Russians are continuing to provide intelligence to Iran directly. What do you make of his statement there? Is this in any way going to sway the Americans to help out more in Ukraine? I mean, we know that the Ukrainians already dispatched some advisors, drone advisors to the Middle East, but what do you make of his statement there?
Yeah, of course, we have to be careful about intelligence information, because the Iranians were complaining already when the Americans and the Israel attacked Iran in 2025. Some Iranian officials complained that the Russian would give intelligence information to Israel to strike sites in Syria. And of course, the Russians don't really want to disrupt their relations with Israel as well. So if that is true, it will be on a very limited basis. But having said this, it also shows that President Trump and President Putin's friendship are not as close because, of course, President Trump is bombing allies of Russia in Iran, and he did so in Venezuela as well. So President Trump is doing what he wants, not so much what Putin wants. Of course, there is some relief for Russia now because of the oil price, and I do think that Russia wants to keep the war going for a while because it would benefit from it. But on the other hand, militarily, the war in Iran would not really change the situation of the Russian external relations to all other countries. That means the Gulf states, as well as Iran, as Israel.
Mm-hmm. One just very quick point now, and we have this pause, as you call it, a breath maybe of no bombings at the moment. If this continues, if the strikes continue for, we don't know for how long, but what's the impact going to be for Europe if this carries on for foreseeable future?
Economically, the impact would be severe, and the pressure will increase from the side of the US to participate in the war. And so the Europeans would be torn between loyalty towards President Trump and trying to avoid to get involved in a major war if this war is dragging on, as you said. So the Europeans will not have good options on the military front, but what they can do is somehow create a proposal for a ceasefire, and as they did already in 2003, which ended up in the 2015 GCPOA nuclear deal. It need not be and will not be the same, but there was the efforts of the European Union and the Europeans, which eventually led to an agreement. It might take some time, but here on the diplomatic level, the Europeans could take some initiative.
All right, thank you so much for all of that. That was Professor Heinz Gärtner from the University of Vienna.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.